the laughing crowd. The desert wind carried the scent of gunpowder and sunburned earth as the late afternoon light bounced off the silver rims of a long, dusty pickup truck. Keanu Reeves stepped out, wearing a worn-out flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. He looked nothing like a Hollywood star. In fact, that was the point. He came here not as an actor, but as a man trying to blend in, trying to experience life as any ordinary person would. He had heard of this private shooting range tucked behind the mountains. No cameras, no fans, just people who lived and breathed firearms. He had always been curious about shooting, ever since a role long ago required him to train with professionals. But this place was different. It wasn't about film choreography or stunt coordination. It was real, raw, and filled with individuals who could smell inexperience from miles away. Keanu parked quietly and walked toward the open range where men and women stood in tight groups, loading rifles, laughing loudly, and exchanging crude jokes. He nodded politely as he approached the main desk where a short, bulky man with a thick beard looked him up and down. His name tag read, Randy. "Name?" the man asked without enthusiasm. "Keanu," he answered softly. Randy narrowed his eyes. "Last name?" Keanu hesitated, then replied, "Reeves." A couple of heads turned at the mention. Randy chuckled, not kindly. "Reeves, huh? Like that actor? You look like him. Just a bit more beat up." There was laughter from nearby shooters. Keanu just smiled. He was used to it. He handed over his license quietly and signed the waiver. Randy tossed him a basic pistol and pointed to Lane 7. "Let's see what Hollywood's got." Lane 7 was in the middle of the range, surrounded by shooters who looked like they hadn't missed a target in years. Keanu took a deep breath and loaded the gun. He had trained, sure, but he hadn't shot in years. His hands were steady, but his heart beat a little faster as he stepped into the lane. He raised the pistol, aimed at the paper target 30 feet ahead, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet landed off-center outside the black circle. He tried again. This time it was worse. The murmurs behind him grew louder. "Guess they don't use real guns in the movies, huh?" someone sneered. "Maybe he's saving his aim for a sequel," another added. Keanu said nothing. He just kept firing, trying to ignore the sting of embarrassment rising in his chest. But the more he focused, the worse it got. The paper target was now riddled with holes, most of them far from the bullseye. Randy walked up, arms folded, grinning. "You know, some guys got it, some guys don't, and some guys should just stick to acting." The group behind Randy burst into laughter. Keanu took off his ear protection, set the gun down, and gave a small nod. "Thanks for the advice." He walked away slowly, passing rows of targets where others had tight, perfect groupings. As he reached the edge of the lot, he heard one more loud remark from a guy named Bo, a former Marine with tattoos down his arms and a voice that boomed like thunder. "Hey, Reeves. Maybe next time, try blindfolded. Couldn't be worse than what you just did." That joke hit harder than any bullet. Keanu paused. He turned around and looked directly at Bo, then walked back toward Randy. "Mind if I borrow a blindfold?" he asked calmly. Randy blinked. "You serious?" Keanu nodded. "Completely." The crowd perked up. Phones came out even though they weren't supposed to record. Whispers filled the air. "He's actually going to do it." Bo tossed him a black cloth from his bag with a smirk. "Here, good luck, movie man." Keanu wrapped the blindfold around his head, covering his eyes. Completely. The world went dark. He stood still for a moment, just breathing. Somewhere deep inside, he let the noise fade. He listened, not to the crowd, but to the wind, to the silence behind the sound. This wasn't about showing off. It was about focus, about presence, about silence. He picked up the pistol again, felt its weight, and turned toward the target he had already humiliated himself on. "Let me know when I'm clear," he said to Randy. Randy hesitated, then muttered, "You're clear." Keanu raised the gun slowly. He remembered the old instructor from years ago. "Feel the center," the man had told him. "Hear the breath. Hold it. Trust your muscle memory." The first shot rang out. A pause. Randy's eyes widened. The bullet had landed in the red circle just shy of dead center. The second shot fired. Closer. The third shot. Bullseye. The crowd fell silent. The fourth, fifth, and sixth shots followed in steady rhythm. Each one hit the target with startling accuracy. No one laughed now. Phones lowered. Eyes widened. People stepped closer in disbelief. Bo's jaw tightened. Keanu fired the seventh shot, then the eighth. When he raised the pistol for the ninth, a soft gust of wind blew across the range. He tilted his head slightly, corrected by feel alone, and pulled the trigger. Bullseye again. He paused. Only one bullet left. With the final breath, he fired the 10th shot. Then silence. Randy walked slowly toward the target, eyes glued to the paper. He counted each shot, his fingers trembling. When he turned back, his face was pale. 10 shots, he said, voice low. 7 bullseyes. 3 inside the red circle. None outside. The place erupted, not in laughter but in stunned silence. Keanu calmly removed the blindfold and placed the pistol back on the counter. "Thanks for letting me try again," he said softly. Bo stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "Where the hell did you learn that?" Keanu looked him in the eye. "From failure." He turned to walk back to his truck, but just as he opened the door, a young girl in a wheelchair rolled up to him. She had been watching from the edge with her father. Her eyes were wide with wonder. "That was amazing," she whispered. "How did you do that?" Keanu knelt down and smiled. "Sometimes when people doubt you, that's when you show them who you really are." She looked at him, then at the range, then back again. "Can I learn too?" He nodded. "You can learn anything you want." And as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the crowd finally began to murmur again, a shadowed figure stepped out of a nearby car. Someone who had been watching quietly. Someone with an old military badge and eyes that missed nothing. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeah," he said. "It's him. And he's even better than they said." The retired general's callus. The dust began to settle and the murmurs at the shooting range faded into memory. Keanu Reeves drove away quietly, his hands gripping the steering wheel with the same stillness he had shown with the pistol. The Wang road stretched out before him like a ribbon of solitude, curling through desert hills that shimmered under the setting sun. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't proud. In truth, he felt a strange ache in his chest. Not from the humiliation, not from the redemption, but from the way people still saw him as a novelty. They had clapped not because they respected him, but because they were shocked. The difference weighed on him. The girl in the wheelchair, that moment, had been real. That had mattered. The rest? It was just noise, the kind of noise he had spent years learning to ignore. But far behind him, something else was happening. The man who had stepped from the shadows at the shooting range, the one with the faded military badge pinned to his chest, had not been there by accident. His name was General Thomas Aldridge, a man once feared and respected throughout the armed forces. He had commanded elite units across the world before quietly retiring after a classified mission went wrong. But Aldridge had never stopped watching, never stopped searching. He had long believed that certain people had rare instincts, ones you couldn't teach or train. People who could listen with more than their ears, feel danger in their bones, and strike with terrifying precision. And when he saw Keanu blindfolded, hitting those shots with nothing but stillness and breath, Aldridge knew he'd found one of those people, maybe the last of them. He dialed a secure line. A woman answered with no greeting, only a code. "Black Echo," Aldridge said, his voice low. "Confirmed," she replied. "Proceed." "I found him," Aldridge said. "Or maybe he found us." "Location?" "East Desert Range outside Glendale. Name is Keanu Reeves." A long pause followed. "The actor?" "Yes," Aldridge said. "But that's just a shell. There's more. Much more." The woman on the line hesitated again. Then, "We'll need proof." "You'll have it," Aldridge said, and ended the call. Meanwhile, Keanu pulled into a quiet rest stop just outside the canyon. He hadn't planned to stop, but something about the silence of the place drew him in. The parking lot was empty. except for an old camper van and a rusted bike chained to a tree. He got out, stretched his legs, and walked toward a picnic table shaded by brittle branches. He sat down, closed his eyes, and let the evening wind brush past him. It reminded him of the places he used to visit as a young man, before fame, before fortune, when he could disappear into the world without being recognized. He missed that freedom more than he could explain. He thought about the girl at the range again. Her words had stayed with him. "Can I learn too?" That question carried weight. He had no idea who she was, but something in her eyes had touched him. The way she believed without doubt. It reminded him of someone he once knew, a woman named Mia. Mia had been the only person who saw him when the rest of the world only saw the actor. She had worked in a rehabilitation center for wounded veterans and trained those who had lost limbs to adapt and rebuild. She had no patience for ego, no interest in celebrity. She had been all about truth, about effort. They had met years ago, quietly, and lost touch just as quietly. But for a brief moment, she had anchored him, and now, in the silence of the canyon, he felt that old ache again, the longing for something real. But his quiet moment didn't last. A black SUV rolled into the lot, its tinted windows catching the light like the eyes of something watching. Keanu stood, instinct rising in him like a tide. The driver stepped out first, then another figure from the back seat, a tall woman in a charcoal suit with piercing eyes and a folder under her arm. She walked with purpose, her steps even and silent, like someone trained to command. "Mr. Reeves," she said without hesitation. He didn't answer, just watched her carefully. "My name is Lena Foster," she said. "I work for a private initiative. We saw what you did today." Keanu's face stayed still. "A lot of people did. Not like us," Lena replied. She set the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were photos, not just from today, but from film sets, charity events, even surveillance footage from training sessions he thought were private. Someone had been tracking him for years. "Why?" he asked. "Because we believe talent like yours shouldn't fade into fiction," she said. "You've trained with some of the best, CIA advisors, tactical specialists, martial artists from Japan to Brazil. But what sets you apart isn't just technique, it's control. You're not just fast, you're precise under pressure. Calm in chaos." Keanu folded his arms. "I'm an actor." "You were an actor," she said calmly. "Now you're something more, if you choose to be." He looked away. "I didn't ask for this." "But you answered anyway," she said. "When the crowd mocked you, you could have walked away. Instead, you stepped into darkness and hit light." Her words hit harder than he expected. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "A test," she said. "Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours. We send coordinates, no cameras, no audience, just you and a challenge." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "And if I say no?" Lena smiled. "You won't." She turned and walked away, leaving the folder behind. The SUV disappeared into the growing dark like a shadow into night. Keanu stared at the folder. It was thick, heavy with information, questions, maybe even answers. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he looked up at the stars beginning to pierce the sky. The next morning would not be about bullets or blindfolds. It would be something else entirely. Something that might finally reveal why he had spent his whole life feeling like he was preparing for something more. The forgotten facility. The sun had barely begun to rise when Keanu Reeves stood alone on the edge of a dry canyon. The coordinates from Lena's envelope burned into the screen of his phone. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. Not his agent, not his closest friends. There was something about the tone of her voice, the way she spoke of darkness and control, that triggered something deeper inside him than curiosity. It was something primal. A quiet part of him had always waited for a moment like this. Not because he thought he was special, but because for years he had sensed a strange misalignment between the life he lived and the instincts he carried. The world thought they knew him. Maybe even he thought he knew himself. But now, as the wind picked up and the dust swirled in ghostly circles, he felt closer to truth than he had in years. A heavy gate stood before him, rusted but locked electronically. Behind it, an old military facility stretched across the desert floor, half buried and surrounded by towering fences. It looked abandoned at first glance, like something forgotten after the Cold War. But as soon as Keanu reached the entrance, Patton placed his hand on the scanner. A low hum rose from the ground. The gates hissed and opened inward, revealing a long, narrow passage cut through stone and steel. Red lights blinked along the walls. Cameras followed every step. He walked without hesitation. The air grew colder as he descended, the light above fading until only dim ceiling lamps guided his path. Then the hallway opened into a large chamber, part lab, part training zone. Mats lined the floors. Targets hung in clusters. Digital simulations blinked to life across curved walls. A control room behind bulletproof glass overlooked the entire arena. And standing in the middle of it all, hands clasped behind his back, was General Aldridge. "You showed up," Aldridge said without turning. Keanu stopped just a few feet behind him. "I came to see what this is about." Aldridge slowly faced him, eyes sharp and weathered. "This is about legacy, about what's left when everything else is stripped away." Keanu didn't flinch. "Why me?" "Because no one else has been watching like you," Aldridge said. "You observe, you calculate. And more importantly, you act when others freeze. I've seen men with perfect aim fall apart under pressure. But you step forward when it counts." Keanu exhaled slowly. "I'm not a soldier." "But you could be something better," Aldridge replied. "Something more honest. We've built a program here, not for killing, but for protecting. The world doesn't need more warriors, it needs guardians. People who don't just follow orders, but who stand for something." He gestured to the surrounding space. "Today is a test, not of strength, but of instinct." A door opened behind them, and Lena entered with two other individuals. One was a quiet woman in combat gear, her expression unreadable. The other was a young man, barely in his 20s, looking nervous but determined. Lena explained the rules in a voice that felt both formal and personal. "There are no weapons in this test," she said. "No violence, just 3 objectives: locate the missing civilian, extract them, and solve the silent code." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Silent code?" "You'll know it when you see it," she said. Without further instructions, the simulation began. The lights shifted. The facility's walls transformed. Suddenly, Keanu found himself standing in what looked like a war-torn building, simulated but hauntingly real. Smoke curled from cracked walls, and distant cries echoed in the distance. Somewhere inside, a child's voice called for help. He didn't hesitate. He moved through the ruined corridors, keeping low, eyes alert. The floorboards creaked under his steps. He passed rooms filled with broken furniture and false bodies designed to test emotional response. Most would freeze at the sight. But Keanu moved with clarity, checking each body for warmth, pulse, or signs of life. None of them were real. All distractions. Except one. The voice of the child. He followed it, listening not just with his ears but with his whole presence. Something about the echoes told him the voice was being redirected. He paused, closed his eyes, and began mapping the acoustics in his mind. A hallway that sounded longer than it looked. A left turn that seemed quiet despite supposed danger. That's where he went. Down a hidden staircase, he found her. A young girl, no more than 8, with wide eyes and trembling hands. She wasn't part of the simulation. She was real. That's when the walls around him froze. Outside the glass chamber, Lena turned sharply toward Aldridge. "This wasn't part of the test." Aldridge leaned forward, expression tense. "Pause the system." "We can't," one of the technicians replied. "It's gone into live mode." Inside, Keanu looked around. He felt it instantly. The room had shifted again, not just visually, but emotionally. Something was wrong. The girl clutched his hand and whispered, "They're still here. A noise, soft but distinct, rattled above the ceiling vents. Keanu pulled the child behind him, pressing his back to the wall. The lights dimmed, then blinked red. Outside, Lena's voice cracked. "Who authorized a live trial?" Aldridge stood. "I didn't. This isn't our tech." The facility had been hacked. Security systems failed. Locks disengaged, and through one of the side entrances, real armed men flooded in. Masked, coordinated, and armed with silence. A rogue cell had broken into the test. They weren't after the girl. They were after Keanu. They had been tracking him too. And now, they were inside the place meant to protect him. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Keanu had already stopped being a performer the moment he picked up the blindfold at the range. Now, he was something else. He looked at the girl and whispered, "Do you trust me?" She nodded, eyes wide. "Then close your eyes." He turned to the vent, reached into the shadows, and pulled out a single shard of glass from the broken light fixture above. The hunt had begun. The shadow protocol inside the cold chamber of the now breached facility. KeanuReeves crouched low behind a steel beam, clutching the small girl tightly against his side. The sharp piece of glass he had taken from the broken light fixture glinted faintly in the emergency light as red strobes pulsed along the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, footsteps moved slowly, measured, deliberate, unafraid. Whoever these men were, they had done this before. They weren't rushing. They were hunting. Keanu's mind raced, not with panic, but with analysis. Every sound, every flicker of light, every metallic groan of the structure was feeding into a quiet blueprint in his mind. The girl was shaking, her breath shallow, eyes wide with terror. But he held her steady with one arm while his other hand slowly traced a line along the floor to a pressure vent just a few feet away. He whispered gently in her ear, "When I say run, you go through that vent. Don't stop. Follow the wind and the sound of dripping water. It'll lead you to safety." Her lip quivered, but she nodded. Keanu counted each breath, each pulse of silence between the steps. And when the nearest set of boots paused just a few feet from the wall, he moved like a ghost. Without making a sound, he slipped behind a crate, drew a small fragment of loose piping, and threw it into the opposite corner. The sound of metal clanging echoed loudly, and the nearest intruder turned, his weapon raised, body tense. The distraction was enough. Keanu turned back to the girl. "Now," he whispered. She crawled into the vent, disappearing into the shadows like a leaf swept into the wind. He waited 2 more seconds, just long enough to be sure she was gone, then rose silently behind the man who had gone to investigate the noise. With one swift move, Keanu drove the edge of the glass shard against the attacker's exposed neck, not deep enough to kill, but enough to force a reflexive gasp and drop the weapon. Keanu caught the rifle before it hit the ground and pulled the man back into the shadows. Meanwhile, in the control room above, chaos erupted. Lena was shouting orders while technicians scrambled to regain control of the facility's network. General Aldridge stood stone still, his fists clenched at his sides, watching Keanu move on the surveillance feed with clinical focus. "He's adapting," Aldridge muttered. "He's not just surviving, he's taking control of the field." "We need to send in extraction," Lena snapped. "Not yet," Aldridge said. "Watch." Down below, Keanu now moved like liquid shadow, the stolen weapon tucked against his shoulder, not drawn for action but ready for necessity. He wasn't here to fight a war. He was here to end it before it truly began. He knew these men weren't just mercenaries. They were too coordinated, too familiar with the facility's design. They were insiders, or worse, ghosts from Aldridge's past. Whatever secrets the general had buried here, someone had come to dig them up. And Keanu had just become the wild card in a game meant to be played by cowards in the dark. He slipped through corridors, disabling cameras as he passed. In one of the storage wings, he found the body of the young man who had entered the simulation with him earlier. Motionless, unconscious, but alive. Keanu dragged him behind cover, secured the wound on his shoulder with duct tape from a nearby utility box, then left a message scrawled in red marker on the wall above him. He's still breathing. Protect him. It wasn't meant for the attackers. It was meant for the facility's watchers. By now, the rogue cell had begun to realize they weren't chasing a scared civilian. They were hunting someone who refused to be prey. The leader of the group, a tall man with a jagged scar along his jaw, spoke into his headset, voice low and cold. This wasn't in the profile. He's improvising. Lethal without fire. Switched to thermal. The hallways dimmed again as thermal sensors clicked to life. Keanu felt it before he saw it. A shift in the temperature of the air, a new hum in the electrical grid. He ducked into a maintenance shaft, used his own breath to fog a mirror, and watched the way the condensation moved. It was a trick he'd learned from a Vietnamese monk years ago during training. Read the air as if it's a tide, feel the current and follow it. That instinct led him to an abandoned command room filled with outdated surveillance equipment and forgotten servers. From here, he accessed the old grid manually, bypassing the firewalls by typing with precise sequences he remembered from set training. Ironic, he thought. Sometimes fiction prepares you better than real life ever can. Within minutes, he'd rerouted part of the system, setting off decoy heat signatures in 5 different zones. Red, human-shaped blobs began appearing on the enemies, sensors drawing them away from the child and the wounded trainee. Now isolated, the leader grew frustrated. He punched the wall, then barked orders to regroup near the generator room, the heart of the facility. Keanu followed them silently. When they reached the generator room, the attackers found nothing but smoke and silence. One of them stepped forward to secure the terminal. A second man covered him. The leader turned back, eyes scanning the shadows. Where is he? And then the lights exploded. A blinding flash triggered the emergency lock on the doors, trapping them inside as the internal defense system, long dormant, sprang to life. Keanu had activated it remotely, using knowledge he'd gathered in less than an hour. Now they were the ones caged, and the hunter had become the ghost once more. In the chaos that followed, Keanu returned to the surface through an emergency access tunnel. He emerged behind the facility's northern ridge just as the sun fully broke the horizon. The girl had made it. She sat near a rock, her arms wrapped around her knees, waiting. When she saw him, she ran forward, tears breaking from her eyes. He dropped to one knee and caught her in a hug. "You did it," he whispered. "You made it out." A moment later, a second black SUV arrived. This time it was Lena, flanked by medical staff and security teams. They rushed to secure the area and sweep the building. She approached Keanu slowly, looking at the child, then back at him. "You weren't supposed to find her. She wasn't part of the program." Keanu stood and handed her the glass shard, now clean. "Then you have bigger problems than I thought." Aldridge joined them minutes later, his face tired, not from age, but from memory. "That group," he said, "they were from Project Hollow Tide. It was shut down years ago, or so we thought." Keanu looked at both of them. They came for something, maybe me, maybe the girl. But they weren't here for a test. They were here for leverage. Aldridge nodded slowly, which means it's already started. "What has?" Keanu asked. "Shadow Protocol," Aldridge said. "A covert program we buried under 6 layers of clearance. We thought it was lost. But if they're back, we'll need more than weapons. We'll need conviction." Keanu turned to the girl. "She's not safe out here." Lena's voice was quiet. "Neither are you." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Then it's time," he said. "You tell me the whole truth." And deep beneath the facility, in the cell where the rogue leader had been captured, a small blinking device on his wrist lit up for the first time, sending a signal far beyond the desert, across oceans, toward a place where a man in a white suit sat watching surveillance feeds with a faint smile and a glass of wine. He leaned back and whispered, "Welcome to the real audition, Mr. Reeves." Echoes of a buried war. The facility was silent now. Not the kind of silence that followed peace, but the tense, uneasy kind. The silence that wrapped around secrets too dangerous to name. Keanu Reeves stood alone in the debriefing chamber, staring at the projected map Lena had placed on the wall. Red dots pulsed over oceans, deserts, and cities. Each one represented a node of something Aldridge had called the Shadow Protocol. And though the name sounded abstract, the danger was not. It was real, and closer than he had ever imagined. Behind him, the door opened with a soft hiss. General Aldridge entered, holding 2 black folders and a weary look in his eyes. "You wanted the truth," Aldridge said, his voice quieter now, more personal. "You earned it." He laid the first folder on the table, then stepped back. Keanu picked it up slowly. Inside were grainy photographs, reports stamped with redacted names and transcripts from conversations that never should have existed. At the heart of it all was a name: Project Hollow Tide. A private weapons development operation started decades ago during the height of geopolitical unrest. The project was designed not around technology, but people. Gifted individuals who demonstrated extraordinary perception, resilience, and adaptability. Soldiers who didn't need machines to be lethal. They needed instinct, purpose, and silence. These weren't super soldiers, Aldridge explained. They were silencers, operatives trained to dismantle conflicts without ever firing a shot. They could infiltrate, influence, and vanish. Ghosts in a world of noise. Keanu turned the pages slowly. Among the profiles was one face that stopped him cold. It wasn't someone famous, not someone from the film industry or past operations. It was a woman, Mia. The same woman he had remembered back at the canyon. The same one who had taught him how to breathe through chaos, how to hold pain without crumbling. "She was one of you?" Keanu asked, his voice hoarse. Aldridge nodded. "One of the best." Keanu stared down at her image, heart pounding with old memories he had never fully understood. He had thought she had left him to pursue peace. Now he realized she had left to protect a world he didn't even know existed. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Keanu asked. "Because you weren't ready," Aldridge said. "And because we didn't know if you would survive this long without waking up to it." Keanu closed the folder slowly. The second one remained untouched on the table. He tapped it once. "And this?" Aldridge hesitated. "That one's your story, the version we've kept from the world." Keanu opened it. Inside were files showing surveillance on him stretching back 2 decades, footage from movie sets, training routines, even private retreats. Military analysts had studied him not as an actor but as a potential, someone with instincts that mirrored their most elite silencers, despite no formal enlistment. He'd been tested unknowingly. Every film, every stunt, every moment of stress observed to see if he would crack. But he never had. "You didn't choose this life," Aldridge said. "It chose you, and we had to know if you could handle it before you even knew it existed." Keanu looked up, anger flickering beneath the surface. "You used me." "We watched you," Aldridge corrected. "And you passed every test we never told you about." Before Keanu could speak, Lena entered carrying a small black device in her hand. Her expression was tense. "The signal that came from the leader's wrist? We traced it." "Where?" Aldridge asked quickly. "A private island off the coast of Greece. Abandoned resort. Now converted into a fortress owned by an anonymous trust. But here's the twist. Maya was last tracked there 6 months ago." Keanu's heart stopped for a moment. "She's alive?" he asked. Lena's voice was careful. "We don't know. But if she is, they're using her for something." Keanu stepped forward. "I want in." Aldridge raised an eyebrow. "This isn't a rescue mission. It's a war zone wrapped in mirrors. They'll be expecting shadows. You walk in as you are, they'll tear you apart." Keanu met his gaze. "Then I won't walk in as I am." The next 72 hours passed in silence and motion. Keanu didn't sleep, didn't pause. He trained under conditions harsher than any film role had ever demanded. Lena pushed him to limits no stunt team had dared, and Aldridge drilled him, in psychological warfare, how to dismantle manipulation, how to recognize signs of mental conditioning. But it wasn't just about physical readiness. They were preparing his mind for something darker. On the 4th night, Lena brought him into a simulation chamber unlike any other. The environment recreated the layout of the island fortress. Stone. Walls, shifting floors, hidden trapdoors. Inside the simulation was an AI model of Mia. Her voice, her face, her mannerisms, and at the climax of the simulation, she turned to him with eyes full of pain and said, "Why didn't you come sooner?" Keanu pulled the headset off, sweat pouring down his face. "They're going to use her voice against me," he said. "They're going to use everything," Lena replied. "Her, your past, your guilt, your grief. That's their weapon. They don't break bones. They break trust." Aldridge entered with a steel case. Inside was a new identity, passport, digital implants, communications gear woven into a bracelet, and a needle containing a slow-release neural stabilizer to help him resist psychological triggers. "This isn't a mission," Aldridge said. "This is a retrieval of a person who holds the final code." Keanu looked up. "Code for what?" Aldridge paused. "For ending Shadow Protocol forever." That night, before boarding the jet that would take him to the drop zone near the island, Keanu stood outside the facility and stared at the sky. The stars looked different now, less distant, more like watchers. He felt no fear, only the weight of clarity. He wasn't going for revenge, not even for redemption. He was going for Maya, for the child she had once been, for the woman who had taught him silence and breath and trust, and for every person who had been used as a pawn in games they never agreed to play. He boarded the plane without another word. Hours later, in the darkness over the Mediterranean, Keanu Reeves prepared to jump from 10,000 feet. No team, no backup, no certainty, only one objective: find Maya and expose the truth behind Shadow Protocol. As the red light above the cabin door flashed green, he whispered the same words she had once told him, the ones that had carried him through every storm. Breathe. Feel. Move. He leapt into the void, and below, a fortress waited with doors that would open only to ghosts. The fortress of mirrors, the night air screamed past Keanu Reeves as he dropped toward the black silhouette of the island, his body cutting through clouds, like a silent arrow loosed from fate itself. Beneath him, waves crashed into jagged cliffs and the wind howled like something ancient. The fortress was carved into the rock itself, a place where walls weren't just made of stone, but of secrets, so old and vile they bled into the ocean below. Keanu had seen sets, stages, battlefields, and darkness, but nothing like this. This was a place built to keep truth buried, and he had come to dig it out no matter what waited inside. His parachute deployed with a whisper, catching the air perfectly as he curved into a narrow ravine near the island's northeast edge. No one patrolled this zone. It was considered unscalable by foot and deadly by approach. That's why Aldridge had chosen it. They knew the minds behind Shadow Protocol were arrogant, secure in their illusions of power. They believed no one could find the hidden entrance nestled behind the rock falls and sea spray. But Keanu found it, not because of tech or maps, but because of instinct. The stone along the base bore faint cuts, almost unnoticeable. Symbols Mia had once drawn in, the sand during their days of quiet, long before any of this madness had found them. They weren't just doodles. They were codes. He slipped through a narrow slit in the cliff and entered complete darkness. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing like soft drum beats in the silence. His boots splashed through shallow pools as he advanced, heart steady. The further he walked, the more the sound changed. The air no longer smelled of salt, it smelled of metal, oil, and something older. Beneath the fortress, a labyrinth awaited. Keanu reached a chamber lit by old fluorescent tubes hanging from rusted pipes. In the center of the room, a digital map rotated slowly in holographic form. Cameras moved silently overhead, tracking him. They didn't sound alarms. They didn't shoot. They just watched. This wasn't a defense system. This was an invitation. His earpiece crackled, Lena's voice faint and distorted. "We've lost visual. Your signal is flickering. We'll..." "Hold position," he whispered back. "Don't wait for me." He moved deeper into the compound, past training arenas filled with mannequins dressed like civilians, corridors lined with soundproof glass, and laboratories sealed behind biometric locks. He passed rooms where laughter was recorded and then played back through distorted speakers. They were studying emotion, replicating voices, creating illusions. It wasn't just about warfare. It was about controlling perception. At the heart of the fortress, he found a wide, circular chamber. A single chair sat in the center. Strapped to it was Mia. She was alive. Her head was bowed, hair covering her face, but she was breathing. Her wrists were bound with cables that pulsed faintly with electrical current. Her skin was pale, bruised, but her presence still strong. He rushed forward, reaching for the locks. "Don't," came a voice behind him. Keanu turned slowly. A man stepped from the shadows. Tall, graceful, with a calmness that chilled the room more than rage ever could. He wore a white suit, impeccably clean despite the filth around him. His face was familiar, not in identity but in type. He was the kind of man who smiled while burning bridges, who shook hands before pulling strings that made people disappear. His name was Nicholas. "I knew you'd come," Nicholas said. "You're just like her." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Let her go." Nicholas circled him slowly. "She came here willingly once. Did you know that? She believed she could change us from within. We let her try. We admired her spirit, her belief in redemption. But in the end, even she understood. Control is the only truth. Every war, every crisis, every act of violence or peace, it's all about who controls the narrative." Keanu clenched his fists. "And that's why you torture people for their voices? Build illusions out of lives?" "We don't torture," Nicholas replied with a smile. "We reframe." He tapped a console and a recording played. Mia's voice, perfectly clear. "The only way to stop the future is to silence the past." But Keanu saw the distortion in her expression on the screen, saw the micro-flickers of forced emotion. They had spliced her voice, edited her meanings. This wasn't real. They were going to use her as a symbol, a martyr or a traitor, whatever served their story. "You wanted to end Shadow Protocol," Nicholas said. "But it doesn't end. It evolves. And now, you're going to be its next." Face lights flickered, metal doors slammed shut, and a low hiss filled the room as gas began to seep from the vents. But they had underestimated Keanu. In one swift motion, he drew the magnetic disruptor hidden in his belt, smuggled in a false tooth, snapped it onto the nearest console, and triggered the failsafe Lena had designed. The gas reversed course, sucked back into the vents. The room shuddered. Lights shattered. And in that chaos, Keanu rushed to Mia and tore through the restraints. Her eyes fluttered open, pain etched across her features, but when she saw him, a small smile broke through. "You actually came." "Of course I did," he said, lifting her gently. Behind them, Nicholas reached for a weapon, but Keanu threw a flash charge across the floor. The burst of light blinded him long enough for Keanu and Mia to escape into the lower tunnel, which collapsed behind them seconds later. They ran, through winding passageways, up stairwells, across a catwalk that groaned under their weight. Explosions rippled below as Lena's extraction team finally breached the outer compound. The entire fortress trembled. From the air, black, helicopters circled like vultures preparing to strike. Outside, the dawn was breaking. As they reached the extraction point on the cliff edge, a rope ladder dropped from the helicopter. Keanu secured Mia first, watching her ascend into the sky, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. But just as he turned to climb, Nicholas emerged again. Bloodied, furious, pistol raised. He shouted something, but the words were drowned out by the roar of wind and blades. He fired. Once, twice. Keanu felt the burn along his shoulder but didn't stop. He leapt for the rope. The world tilted, then steadied, then lifted. As they rose, the fortress below erupted, not from bombs but from within. The systems Mia had triggered before being captured had corrupted the entire structure. Memory files, surveillance, decades of manipulation, erased in cascading waves of data collapse. Shadow Protocol wasn't just defeated, it was wiped from history. In the helicopter, Mia leaned against Keanu, her eyes full of both exhaustion and quiet joy. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," Keanu said softly, his voice calm. "You saved me. Years ago. I'm just returning the kindness." As the island faded behind them, Aldridge's voice came through the comms. "We got it all. Every trace. Clean, buried, gone." Keanu looked out the window. "Good," he replied. "But let's not forget it happened." Mia closed her eyes and smiled. And in that silence, between history and healing, between chaos and clarity, they found something neither had known they were still searching for. Not justice, not revenge, but peace.